Muted.
Brian Stromberg. We are going to start in just a few minutes to let everyone kind of filter in to our virtual space. So I'll be back with you in just a couple minutes.
Muted.
Okay, so let's get started. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Brian Stromberg, and I'm a housing research specialist here at the National Housing Conference. Joining me in this webinar are Jillian Olinger from the Kirwan Institute and Dan Pontious from the Baltimore Regional Council. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Capital One, for sponsoring our webinar series. We very much appreciate their support, and I am compelled to say that any opinions and errors are ours and ours alone. So before we get started, I have a couple introductory notes. First, the most frequently asked question is whether or not this is being recorded, and the answer is yes. An archived copy of this webinar will be made available. We will send a link out to everyone who registered once the recording is online. We try to provide these resources within about 48 hours of the webinar, and you should be getting an email about it. Second, please note that all participant lines are muted in order to ensure a good quality experience for everybody. However, we will be taking questions. If you look at the screen, you can see a little screenshot. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please submit it through this box. You can see it outlined in red with the nice arrows on it as well. We'll answer as many of your questions as possible at the end of the webinar. And finally, I'd like to address technical difficulties. While we hope that the webinar does run smoothly for everyone, we know that this does not always happen. So if you run into any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Help menu at the top of the GoToWebinar control panel. Or if that does not work, please visit the GoToWebinar support site at support.citrixonline.com. Okay, with that out of the way, I can introduce our topic for today, which is opportunity mapping. Opportunity mapping, very simply defined, is the use of geographic data to identify places that give individuals a greater shot at a higher quality of life. This is done by creating a composite index from a set of indicators that cover the various aspects of well-being, including public health, public safety, education, income, poverty concentrations, and other socioeconomic indicators that are traditionally associated with life outcomes. You can see several maps on this slide, taken from John Powell's testimony in the Thompson v. HUD case. In this case, the indicators are combined into the single composite map, which is designed to show areas of low, moderate, high, and very high opportunity. I promise you that that's what it says on there, even though the legend, I'm sure, is very small on your screen. So why do we do opportunity mapping? Why would you want to do opportunity mapping? One reason is that creating these maps can illuminate where policy may have fallen short. It is one thing to know that certain neighborhoods or communities struggle with particular issues. It is quite another to see those struggles clearly represented on a map. These maps are an opportunity to give communities a chance to define what is important to them. Another reason, which is perhaps more practical and of more immediate concern to many in our audience, is to fulfill the obligations described by the new HUD rule regarding the affirmative furthering of fair housing. Part of this obligation is the creation of an assessment of fair housing. This assessment has several requirements, one of which is an analysis of data, including data provided by HUD and any data collected from local sources. There is no specific obligation to create maps from this data, but given the inherently geographic nature of fair housing issues, the creation of maps should be considered more or less essential. While HUD has made a large amount of their data accessible to the public, the AFFH rule also strongly suggests that the HUD data is supplemented with other sources. This slide has a short list of potential data sources that go beyond what HUD provides. As an example of local data, I can show you the website for the DC data catalog, which has a plethora of different topics of data collected by the DC government. Several cities have very similar websites. In fact, they all look very, very similar, using Esri's ArcGIS online platform as a foundation for it. But this is an example of where you can go to find data if you need to supplement your HUD data and other federal sources for your AFFH. Excuse me. There we go. The Opportunity Project, which was just launched in March by the White House, provides access to data from 12 cities as well as the federal government. It's a really good resource for the kind of local data that HUD is talking about, and you can see it here. You can see the 12 different jurisdictions. The cities are included. You have federal, Baltimore, Chattanooga, Detroit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I strongly recommend checking this out. The website is opportunity.census.gov. There are also other providers. Whoa, how did that happen? Sorry, everyone. There are also other providers besides the local data, which is usually publicly available and free. There are some that package this data into more accessible forms. Services like the ArcGIS online service and Policy Map can provide access to public and private data, along with certain mapping tools to analyze the data and create maps. However, both of these services require subscriptions. There are also a number of tools that can be used once the data has been selected and gathered. The most powerful of these are the desktop GIS software packages. Esri's ArcGIS, which is the most common and the most popular, and most likely you've heard of it before, and also the open source and community supported Quantum GIS or QGIS software package. They're two very popular choices depending on your organization's funding resources and comfort level with technology. There are also several online mapping services like Mapbox and CartoDB, which provide tools for mapping but do not provide any data, while PolicyMap and Social Explorer provide both. HUD's AFFH tool, which Dan is going to talk about a little bit in his presentation if we have time, also provides data and a mapping tool, so the data available through it is somewhat limited and should be supplemented from other sources. So that's all for my brief introduction. I hope there was some benefit and perhaps some people learned a little bit about the kind of resources that are available. If anything was unclear or if you have any questions about any of the resources that I mentioned, feel free to give me a call or email me. Email is probably a better bet since I haven't quite mastered the voicemail system for NHC yet. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jillian Olinger from the Kirwan Institute.
I'm with Kirwan Institute and serve as a public policy and planning analyst. And before I begin, kind of going a little bit into more detail on the foundations of opportunity mapping and why we do it and Kirwan's experience with it, I will just share a little bit about the organization. So we were founded in 2003 at Ohio State here in Columbus, Ohio, really as an interdisciplinary research institute. And our mission is simple, but by no means easy, to bring about a society that is fair and just for all people. And our research is designed to be actively used to solve problems in communities. And to do this, we work with an extensive network of colleagues and partners, ranging from other researchers to grassroots advocates, policymakers, and community leaders, both here and at home in Ohio and nationally. And our central goals are to really inform the public of leading research developments, to provide capacity building for allied social justice organizations, and to influence policy, practice, and investment that support equity and justice. And as you can see on the screen here, we really focus our work in 4 domains: the areas of education, equity and sustainable communities, public and community health, and criminal justice. But there are really 2 central concepts that guide the work that we do or really inform our worldview. The first of which is structural disadvantage. And this is the process by which policies, systems, culture, and history all interact across institutional domains to produce and sustain racial inequality. Our second framework is the lens of implicit bias, or our race and cognition work. And this research describes the cognitive processes that operate, often unconsciously, to differentially impact opportunity. And research shows that these structural and cognitive processes really work together across institutions, time, and place to contract or expand opportunity. And another way we like to think about it here at Kirwan is to describe it as producing highly uneven geographies of opportunity, because we also know in 60 years of social science research documents that where you live matters tremendously for what opportunities you have access to. For example, as many of us on the call will be familiar with, the U.S. has a remarkably racialized history of community development and housing policy. For example, through practices such as redlining, restrictive covenants, urban renewal, and all of these have left a legacy of disinvestment and uneven access to wealth and other opportunities that are still impacting the people and communities that we work with today. To the point that we can actually look at zip codes in our metro areas and see a difference in life expectancy based on where you live. And one anecdote I'd like to share is that our Children's Hospital here in Columbus has really undertaken a holistic, community-based approach to healthcare for precisely this reason. And one of the pediatricians we work closely with, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but he likes to say that if some child gets sick or injured, he's really good at patching them up, putting them back together, but that he can simply look at the zip code of where that child came from and know whether all the work he did will have a lasting impact on the child. Basically, it's the quality of what's going on in the community that really determines the health of children. And so we've created a way to kind of help communities think through what that all actually means, and how do we take that information and process it and use it effectively. And today, as many of us know, we have more and more data at our hands than ever before, but we often find ourselves lacking a way to organize it, interpret it, and use it all as effective as possible. In many of our circles, we'll hear things like analysis paralysis or planning fatigue. And so one of the tools that we pioneered in our earliest days here at Kirwan to help people and communities really think through and understand opportunity and its racial and spatial aspects is what we call opportunity mapping. And so this slide really shows the different factors that went into the development of that model, but at the end of the day, and like Brian described, it's really utilizing GIS to tell the story of structural disadvantage. So we know that opportunities are often geographically clustered in a few communities while they are lacking or sorely insufficient in others. And this creates a web of high and low opportunity neighborhoods across metro regions. And we can map this. Given our history of development, of course, we know many low-income communities, especially those of color, are often spatially isolated and segregated from critical opportunities. And the spatial segregation has been documented to not only limit the development potential for individuals, but also reduce the development capacity of the entire region. So it's a cumulative effect that harms not just individuals, but the performance of the entire region. The fundamental questions of opportunity mapping exercises in a nutshell are these: that we want to find out where opportunity is located geographically, if there are different groups of people concentrated in areas of low or high opportunity, and then what strategies can really begin to change this geography and also connect more residents to opportunity. And so one of the earliest applications, which Brian also touched on, of the opportunity mapping model was the Thompson v. HUD case, and it's fun being on the presentation today with Dan because we're kind of coming full circle in the application of opportunity mapping, especially in the Baltimore region. So the Thompson v. HUD case was a housing discrimination suit initiated in '96, filed by the Maryland ACLU on behalf of 16,000 public housing residents in the city of Baltimore. After several years of litigation, the district court judge ruled that HUD had in fact violated the Fair Housing Act by failing to affirmatively further fair housing for African Americans in subsidized housing in the Baltimore region. And the judges stated that HUD could not consider the city as a container to house the entire region's poor. And you can see the analysis that we did almost a decade ago shows that more than 2 out of 3 African Americans and more than 4 out of 5 low-income African Americans lived in low opportunity neighborhoods in the region, and that nearly 3 of 4 subsidized units were clustered in these low opportunity neighborhoods. So opportunity mapping was able to not only diagnose the challenge and the issue and the experience, but also provided a tool for the remedy phase that stakeholders in the region and that HUD could use to actually fulfill the affirmatively furthering fair housing mandate. So in a nutshell, opportunity mapping, it's based on decades of social science research. It's a holistic way of interpreting data at the community level, and it's a dynamic tool for engagement and policy making. And on the screen here are some typical categories and indicators within each category that Kirwan has used in many of its opportunity mapping projects. I also want to note, though, that sometimes in the community development field, there can be a tension between place-based or mobility-based interventions, and we really stress that the opportunity framework is a both and. We see place-based interventions as just as important as mobility, and of course opportunity mapping, the fact that it's a tool that can be engaged with in communities and really inform decision making, can really help kind of identify which strategies make the most sense for which neighborhoods. And the model has gained a lot of support over the last decade. Again, it's really kind of changed the way that even HUD is talking about community challenges and assets in terms of developing our communities. And kind of the spearhead initiative that came out of this new understanding was really the Sustainable Communities Initiative that started in 2009 with over 140 local grantees and communities, really embracing this new model of regional community development. And Kirwan was subcontracted by PolicyLink to provide technical assistance to grantees as equity capacity builders, and one of our key charges was to provide TA on understanding and developing the Fair Housing Equity Assessment, also known as the FAEA. With the FAEA requirement, HUD was really encouraging grantees to ensure that disadvantaged populations were not just included in the planning process, but done so in a meaningful way, in a way that had some decision-making authority, that the planning process itself identified and addressed pockets of poverty, especially for racial and ethnic populations, but also for other protected classes within the Fair Housing Act. The FAEA was a requirement of all grantees and was really built around the utilization of data, deliberation, and decision-making activities to support fair housing and equity in grantee regions. And you can think about the FAEA we had, so because of this Sustainable Communities Initiative, we now have a really great portfolio of communities across the country that were essentially piloting this new affirmatively furthering fair housing rule, and we're kind of the beta test for the AFH tool that Dan will touch on a little bit later in our presentation. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dan, who will be sharing about their experiences in the Baltimore region.
Oh, Dan, sorry, you were muted for a second. Would you mind starting over again?
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Brian and Jillian, no problem. I am the Housing Policy Coordinator at the Baltimore Metropolitan Council, which is our metropolitan planning organization in the Baltimore region. My main role is I staff something called the Baltimore Regional Fair Housing Group, which is entitlement and public housing authorities in our metropolitan area that coordinate together to meet their affirmatively furthering fair housing responsibilities. We also did in 2011 receive a Sustainable Communities grant from HUD, and so I was also the lead housing person in that effort, which we call the Opportunity Collaborative. And what I'm going to do in this presentation is go quickly through the mapping that we did as part of the Opportunity Collaborative process. We did complete a fair housing equity assessment, as Jillian mentioned, as was required in the Sustainable Communities programs, and which kind of served as a template for the new fair housing rule. And then I'm going to talk about how, we actually have a number of opportunity maps in the region, so kind of how we are looking at them and what they're used for. And then I'm going to finish up talking a little bit about the new HUD tool, because we were just learning about that as well. It's not, it is new. It's not exactly what we did for the fair housing equity. So even though Kirwan started mapping in the 2000s, we started our fair housing equity assessment going all the way back to the kind of the unopportunity mapping of the 1930s, where the federal government felt compelled during the last great foreclosure crisis to recommend to banks where they should invest and where they should not invest, what were good investments, what were bad investments. And they, this is the Baltimore's 1937 map. There are these for, I think, a couple hundred cities around the country. And this is the origin of the term redlining, of course, where the federal government said high minority areas should not be places where mortgages are issued. And then, in fact, they should be issued with the lowest terms in the newest communities that were racially restricted to white people. So, and that mapping really influenced the Federal Housing Administration's policies into the 1960s, and is one of the main reasons why there is an affirmatively furthering fair housing requirement in the Fair Housing Act, with the idea that there's harm to be undone, not just discrimination to be stopped. And what we did in our fair housing equity assessment is sort of looked at, what is the legacy of this, government-sponsored discrimination, and we looked at the patterns of African American residents in the metropolitan area in 1980 and 2010. So you can see that as after both 12 and 42 years after the Fair Housing Act was passed, African American households in the region gained more access to larger parts of the region, but we are still a very segregated region. We did not become an integrated region because of that. And that has implications for opportunity in the region. This foreclosure map, which is in our fair housing equity assessment, the darker brown areas are the higher rates of foreclosure. And you can see, I'll just try to toggle back here. It's just a stunning match with the racial patterns in our region. If you look at the subprime loan maps, it's the same thing. And in fact, that's why Baltimore City sued Wells Fargo in 2008 and won a settlement in terms of discrimination. So that's sort of the background for the opportunity map that we created. And the document that the National Housing Conference put together on this has all the component maps. I don't have those in these presentations, but we looked at indicators from education, housing. You can see the 6 different categories on the screen there. The University of Maryland National Center for Smart Growth was our partner and consultant on this particular program and led us through a big stakeholder process, looked at more than 100 indicators. We ended up with 92 indicators, and I'm not quite sure we would do that again, but what it showed to me was that in some ways, it's not critical exactly which indicators you include and weight which way. The structure of opportunity in the metropolitan areas is pretty strong. So the darker brown areas are the higher opportunity parts of our metropolitan area, and the lighter yellow areas are lower opportunity areas. And you can see I highlighted some of the most prominent out of the 92 indicators, some of the most prominent, highly weighted. Education and access to jobs were the highest weighted aspects of this map. And what we did, we took a look at, this is the opportunity map overlaid with subsidized housing, and then we also took a look at market rate planned multifamily housing. So you can see a little bit on the map sort of the different pattern, especially in the city, frankly, between subsidized housing and market rate multifamily planned housing. We also did some numeric analysis of this, and this is a little confusing because on the bar graph here, the darker shades are the lower opportunity areas, but you can see subsidized less than 20% in the high opportunity, 2 highest opportunity quintiles, more than 60% in the lowest 2 opportunity quintiles. And pretty much the reverse for the multifamily market rate pipeline, about 60% in the highest opportunity and less than 20% in the lowest opportunity. So we use this information to develop some place-based strategies in our regional housing plan and fair housing equity assessment. So this is how we kind of tried to get beyond the debate between place-based and mobility. We're saying, you know, on this map, it's kind of all place-based. So the orange, the Orioles orange areas here are the high opportunity quintiles, 2 high opportunity quintiles. The darker orange are growth areas. And what we're saying is for that area, we really need to preserve and expand affordable housing opportunities there. Those are the high opportunity areas, and we need to do a better job of providing affordable housing opportunities there. And then in the non-high opportunity areas, we divided them into the green, we call vulnerable areas. Those are areas that are pretty strong, but the market's a little fragile. We want to revitalize affordable housing in those areas, and then also make sure that those areas are being marketed, and that they remain strong and remain places that people from all walks of life in Baltimore want to live. And then the final area in blue is what we call our highly challenged markets. That includes the racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, which is a term in the new Fair Housing Rule and in the new assessment of fair housing. But it is somewhat broader than that as well. And those are the areas in Baltimore that have very high vacancy, very, very low value. You know, a little marketing you need more than that. It's like the Sandtown area of Baltimore where Freddie Gray lived. And our recommendations for these areas are twofold. If someone wants to move to a higher opportunity area, we want to make a voucher and mobility counseling available to people so that they can access the higher opportunity that our region offers. And for people who want to stay and improve their community, we have recommendations for really coordinated and much more substantial investments in those communities that is not just affordable housing. It needs to include more jobs, infrastructure, better schools, you know, many coordinated investments to bring opportunity to those areas. One other aspect we did through our mapping is, even though we are a highly segregated region, we highlighted the areas of our metropolitan area that are diverse, that do reflect the diversity of the region. And one of our recommendations is to use techniques employed in Oak Park, Illinois, and other places in marketing to keep those places strong so that they don't follow the racial change history of our metropolitan area. So that's a quick run through our Opportunity Collaborative mapping and how we use that to fashion our recommendations from our Fair Housing Equity Assessment. I'm going to go through a number of different maps. Jillian mentioned that the Kirwan Opportunity Map in the Baltimore area was used in the remedy phase of the Thompson versus HUD trial. What that did, what the lawsuit did was the main outcome of that lawsuit was to create a regional mobility program that actually got going as a partial consent decree even before the case was resolved. And this is kind of an old, this is a few, you know, maybe 4 years old. This is originally, but these are the indicators that program used from its inception in the very early 2000s, I think around 2001, 2002. So because it was a fair housing desegregation case, it used poverty and percent African American and percent public housing to guide where these new opportunity vouchers would be used, and they could be used only outside of these green areas, which are either more than 10% poverty, more than 30% African American, and more than 5% public housing. So that's one map in our region. Our state housing finance agency, the Maryland Department of Housing and Community Development, has its own opportunity map. They've picked, really on their own, starting a few years ago, picked 11 indicators, and they are the typical indicators that Jillian showed, and decided that everything above the state average would be high opportunity in this map. And so the light blue shading, it's a little harder to see on this map, but the light blue shading are the high opportunity areas in the Baltimore area. And the state housing agency uses that map to guide the competition for 9% low-income housing tax credits. There actually is a fair housing complaint against the state relating to the tax credit program, and so this is a new effort to really try to provide more incentive in the tax credit program to locate affordable housing in high opportunity areas. And then, of course, there's our map. So that's 3 major opportunity maps in the region. And so the mobility program, again, this is out of the Thompson versus HUD lawsuit. Now, and last year, they combined all of these maps. They really took a look at all of them, looked at where they overlapped, and also took a really fine-grained look at things like school quality. And they literally have a GIS program that where they can look at the school zones and see how the attendance zones lined up with the census tracts. So they have an incredibly fine-tuned way, because they have already helped more than 3,000 households move to high opportunity areas. The final 2012 settlement is going to result in more than about 4,400 families by 2018 locating in high opportunity areas. So this is an opportunity map that really has everyday application, and they've really fine-tuned it. So this is one key map that's used in the region now, and we are just starting through a seed grant from HUD to start up a regional project-based voucher program based on a model created in Chicago, and our public housing agencies have agreed, have all come together to use this map for those project-based vouchers too. So that is one of the key things as you're looking at opportunity mapping. What is the use? And I think that can really guide. If you know what you want to use this for, is it for recommendations for your entitlement agencies, recommendations for your public housing agencies? That'll help guide, what indicators you want to take a look at and what kind of stakeholders you need to bring together to figure out who's going to be bought into this map and its implications for what you do. And so just the last few slides I want to go through are the new HUD mapping tool. And we are just sort of starting to look at this ourselves too. We just put together a memorandum of understanding between 6 entitlement jurisdictions and 4 public housing authorities to do a joint regional assessment of fair housing in a couple of years. And so we're just starting to look at this tool. But this is if you go to this website, this brings you to HUD's GIS mapping tool, and they don't have one composite opportunity map, and apparently they did that on purpose, but they have these kind of component maps. So you can see map 9 looks at school and overlays the demographics. They have maps for job proximity, labor market participation, poverty, environmental health. So these are the types of opportunity maps that now HUD, through the new fair housing rule, is providing for you to use, without having to dig up the data yourself. And what I did this morning was just kind of create a, this is the school proficiency map, and you can see overlaid with demographics. The orange dots are white households, the green dots are African American households in the region, the purple outlines are the racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty in the region. So you can get a sense, you can kind of play around with it, adjust the size of the dots, and get a sense of how these indicators come out in your region. They also have tables that you can export from this same tool. And I picked the opportunity indicators by race and ethnicity and downloaded that Excel file, and here is that table. And so this is some of the data behind the maps. This is jurisdiction specific, so the top half of the table is Baltimore City. And what this does is sort of breaks down an opportunity index by different racial categories for the city on the top half, and for the whole metropolitan area on the bottom half. And so you can create this for your metropolitan area, your jurisdiction, and take a look at how the opportunity indices come out for the different racial groups in your region. And then this fits with the tool, the assessment tool, because what HUD does is walks you through a series of questions by looking at the maps and the data. And so this is the one that looks at education opportunities. So these are the questions that HUD asks you, and I don't know that I know exactly how we're going to go about this, but you can take a look at the map, you can take a look at the data. I believe you can get the data behind the map, even by census tract. So that's this is a little bit about how opportunity mapping fits with the new HUD Fair Housing Rule 2, and I think that's my last slide. There's my information. If you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with me. OpportunityCollaborative.org is our Sustainable Communities Project website, so if you want to see more from our Regional Housing Plan and Fair Housing Equity Assessment, you can go there and click on the housing plan, and we've got it all there. So that's my presentation.
Great, thank you, Dan.
Now I'm gonna. Yeah. I'm gonna turn it over to Jillian. I think, right?
Yeah.
Here we go. That's
yeah.
right. So here we go.
Okay. So I just wanted to finish out, thank you, Dan, our presentation, just to share a few of the lessons, general lessons that we've learned from engaging an effective opportunity mapping process, and then some more specific ones that we learned from our work as SCI TA capacity builders. And then Dan, feel free to hop in at any point too if you have anything that you want to add on to what I share. But in general, for an effective opportunity mapping process, we found that it's iterative. So expect it to, for there to be revisions. The process itself is really about engagement. So that means there needs to be time built in for discussions and revisions to take place. And we think it's really important to make space for that aha moment. What new questions does this information raise? How are advocacy efforts specific to one issue area integrating with other issue areas? So again, the first maps that you create are likely not going to be the ones that you end up with. An effective process is also focused. So as Dan alluded to in his presentation, that we need to understand that there are limitations to the data, that no perfect data exists, and too much time spent trying to find or craft that perfect data really is often not worth the marginal increases in accuracy, and it really kind of misses the point of the process when people get stuck here. The third that we've learned is the importance of ground truthing the maps. So once the maps reveal areas of high and low opportunity, we caution against that shallow read. Again, this is why the process is iterative. Relying solely on the quantitative-based data in the map is often not enough to make investment decisions, but should also be complemented by the second level of more qualitative information gathering, especially to answer some of those difficult questions around race and place. Many different stories can be told through the data, so it's essential to ground truth not only with stakeholders who have expertise in a given topic, for example, with education or public health, but also with the people who are actually experiencing in their daily lives what the maps are portraying. And this leads into this final bullet here, that we strongly urge people to also undertake some form of asset mapping in conjunction with the opportunity mapping, because the assets shape people's experiences in communities just as importantly as other more mappable data might be illustrating. So these assets are often provide a more nuanced story about the opportunity in the region. And what did we learn specifically from SCI? So thinking about the new assessment of fair housing, the new rule, opportunity mapping is really an exercise that hits on all three of the aspects: the data analysis, the engagement and deliberation, and the implementation and strategizing. Throughout the FAA process, HUD was really kind of hitting on these 3 Ds. And so we know that opportunity mapping can help in all of those areas. Almost all the grantees that we interviewed too as part of a follow-up to the SCI initiative really identified the FAA going through this fair housing and equity assessment, and especially the mapping applications, that the process really was a positive endeavor in the community, and that there were some really great early outcomes, particularly around strengthened dialogue and capacity to even just engage issues of equity in the region. And so that was a really important tangible outcome that many grantees noticed. And especially for those grantees that were able to build a bigger table, that we found that the more diverse the table, the better the assessment and the more resources that were brought to bear. So the group that had the diversity of stakeholders really allowed for a broader engagement in addressing not just fair housing challenges, but also all of those other structural challenges that we talked about in the beginning of the presentation that many grantees had been able to do previously. So stakeholders became much more aware of connections between, say, fair housing, transit, land use, and school quality, for example. Folks were able to really see that fair housing is about schools, it is about public health, and so that there were room to bring other stakeholders and resources to bear in these conversations. And that's all I have for just some quick lessons, and I think we're open to answer any questions.
Yeah, we do. Thank you very much, Jillian and Dan, for that wonderful presentation. We have a few questions that were submitted from people participating or listening in online. One question that was interesting to me was about how you incorporate aspects of opportunity that aren't very easily measured. And I think that Jillian, you touched on that with the idea of incorporating measurements of opportunity that don't necessarily translate very well into quantifiable map making. So if you have any comments about that, kind of finding a way to incorporate less mappable things into opportunity maps.
Yeah, it's not that you're so much including it on the I don't know, the visual document, right? It's that you're incorporating it into an understanding of what's going on in the community, and then also what that might suggest for strategies and interventions coming out. So it's really a complement to what you're seeing, and especially the finer grain. You know, the lower level that you want to, the lower the level you go, the less accurate the data gets. So being able to really capture people's stories and experiences can help provide the nuance that often is lacking in just the kind of hardcore quantifiable data. I don't know if Dan, if you had any experiences in Baltimore in this regard in terms of asset mapping.
Yeah, I would just, I was going to echo, and I think it relates to this question too, your point that you know, oftentimes, you know, this mapping isn't the be-all and end-all, and depending on how you move forward, you may need to dig deeper or look at some other things. I mean, that's definitely true for our map. And the map I showed with the 3 colors that shows sort of the 3 strategies. I mean, it paints a broad regional picture and gives people who are familiar with the region know, you know, what those places are. But once we dig down into any one place, it's going to take a lot more, you know, really taking a look at the data on a much more fine-grained level to figure out exactly what we're going to do. And similar, I showed the diversity map. That was to kind of give people a sense. Okay, these are the places in our region that could be good candidates for this. But now, as we move forward into implementation, we're really looking for where are places that are interested in doing that. And so, you know, we're not saying, oh, you have to be in, in one of those blue shaded areas to participate in this. If someone wants to be a diverse community, we'll work with them where they are. So. So I think that it really, I think the data can show you things that, you know, or they can help tell a story, but then when it comes to what are you going to, you know, you'll probably find yourself, you know, looking at new data or fine-tuning things when you get closer to implementation. Like we did with the opportunity map. We knew we needed a map that, you know, if we're going to focus on families with children, for example, you know, the schools is a big important piece of that. So we knew we needed a map that really looked closely at the schools.
Okay,
one of the maps, oh, just a quick add-on. One of the maps that I thought was really interesting, Dan, that you and your collaborative did was the social capital map. And so this to me is like a prime example of something that might be hard to show on a map, but we know is so important to healthy community development. And so, you know, the map of capital could indicate leadership development, you know, as really important within a community, but that's not something that could necessarily be easily portrayed via a map, but it's definitely an important aspect of community revitalization. And so being able to kind of capture those stories, you know, is all part of an asset mapping process.
Right, and I think
sorry, go ahead. We have a couple more questions.
I don't want to, yeah, as you, I mean, the social capital map, I mean, you can take a look at the component indicators. I mean, it does give us some sense, but I think if we were going to be moving into work in a particular community, I do think that's where, and I think the new HUD rule anticipates this, that there's going to be local information, you know, that probably isn't in a national free data database like we drew from for these opportunity maps. So anytime you're going to do work at a more local level, you know, as opposed to, you know, this was like the number of churches, and I don't know how this particular database came together for a number of churches per, you know, per square mile or something like that. But, you know, if you're working in a particular community, people are going to know, okay, these churches serve this purpose. I mean, you're going to get much more fine-grained and locally known information that you'll work with. I think the more you get into implementation, the more local you get focused.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we got a few questions. I'm trying to pick out ones that have the broadest appeal, maybe, or broadest application. One question is regards how do you handle or prepare for the political consequences of producing opportunity maps? Obviously, designating certain areas as high or low opportunity can have consequences for a lot of different aspects of cities and communities and neighborhoods. So any suggestions from either of the panelists on how to handle that kind of consequence?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, this is sort of the strategy we, I mean, one of the, I would say just move forward, you know, I mean, obviously anything that's going to happen as a result of these exercises is going to have to be in the context of the political dynamic in your jurisdiction and metropolitan area. But I mean, it is the case that, I mean, we applied for this grant, we received it. We knew when we got the grant that we had to do, in fact, we said in our application that we wanted to do opportunity mapping. So it seemed to help the region open up to the, I mean, I think people knew what they were getting into. And I know there were times when I thought I would run into problems, and I didn't. So I guess my main suggestion would be don't be too afraid of that. You know, just do the work and you know, bring together stakeholders and be respectful and move it forward. And I do think our experience of the Sustainable Communities program is that the central idea behind the Fair Housing Equity Assessment and even this new Fair Housing Rule is that if a region is, you know, is kind of cajoled or forced, or, you know, or if the structures are just set up so that this is the way you do it, you look at this data and you answer these questions, you know, that it will, and you have to consult with these stakeholders, you know, so you can't just do it in your room in your Metropolitan Planning Organization office. You have to talk with local stakeholders and consider data that they might bring to you. That if you do that, you'll end up doing things that you otherwise wouldn't have done, and that is certainly the case in the Baltimore metropolitan area. And it hasn't come with big political, you know, turmoil.
Is that, I mean, do you find a similar experience with Kirwan, Jillian?
Yeah, and so that's where all the kind of general effective, the lessons learned for an effective process came from. So first and foremost, I would say the two most important would be that it's iterative and that it's ground truth. So when you're presenting kind of this first stab at the mapping and, you know, communities are showing up as either high opportunity or low opportunity, really being transparent about what the data can say and what it can't say, who's involved in the process, how their opinions are going to be heard, and I think the opportunity framework itself is a really nice, it's kind of it's a common ground. I think people, when they can intuitively understand how opportunity can be differentially distributed across a region, and the maps really can provide people with an understanding of the where, the why, and the how, but it also provides then a shared understanding not just of current conditions, but also it's a framework for future accountability. So opportunity mapping really provides a lot of different avenues of engagement And again, just being open to hearing the feedback from community that, you know, maybe this map doesn't fully portray everything that's being experienced. Again, that's why we also think combining the asset mapping is so important, because even if a community is showing up as low opportunity based on, you know, the quantitative data, there could be a lot going on in terms of more of the qualitative aspects, and, you know, presence of social capital could be really high, and engagement and that sort of thing, things that aren't easily captured. So giving people the space to share that is really important.
Okay, thank you. So when you look at the use of geographic data, one of the big things that comes out is the use of technology, and that's something that's really common. I mean, looking at either computer software or using GPS devices to record stuff. So one question that we have talks about stakeholders that have sophisticated backgrounds and are really have a lot of experience working with data and using technology to kind of analyze that data and gather it and kind of manipulate it. And then you have people in the community who don't have those kinds of skills. So the question that our participant is asking is, how do you keep both sides of these engaged? How do you engage with the full spectrum of either data experience or technological expertise?
Well, I think that was kind of one of the impetuses on HUD in creating this online tool that Dan gave us a quick overview of, was to start to bridge that gap and give places that might not have as much capacity for kind of intensive, you know, technical data mining and gathering, still an opportunity to have these critical conversations and at least get this baseline understanding of what's going on in the region. And again, I think another part of the process, and definitely that we learned through the SCI process, is that the bigger the table, the more people that you invite to be part of the process, the more resources, that are brought to bear. So it's not just your MPO or your organization that has to do all the heavy lifting. If you build a bigger table and invite more people, they can kind of help with that and provide the data that they keep in-house. That is also important when we think about community development.
Right, and I think that's also built into the AFFH rule also, where they emphasize that while HUD has a lot of publicly available data, they also strongly emphasize collaborative data collection and finding local sources. So I think that's something to consider with the AFFH rule. Dan, did you have any comments on that?
I think you just need to think it through and just and go for it. And there will be different stakeholders who will be engaged in different ways. I mean, there will be the folks who will be willing to sit in a room with a computer and really look at through the data and talk through the implications of this indicator or that indicator. And so you want to have the meetings where the people of that kind of capability can do, and interest, can do that. And then, but then it's also helpful. I think the lesson of our process is there's a really important role for everyone in this process. So if you turned it over to the GIS people, you wouldn't get something that would make sense. That would be that usable. Probably you would miss a lot. You'd miss important perspectives. And so there's something about needing to really winnow it down and not have it be 50 slides, and put together a more defined number of slides for just a lay audience. You kind of, if you're more on the technical side, it forces you to think in regular terms. How is this going to make a difference? What does this mean for a real person just living in our metropolitan area, in different parts of our metropolitan area? So, and I think if you think through that and have a team of people who can sort of think through, okay, how do we engage the technical people, and then how do we put this together in a presentation that won't be interesting and interesting to a regular person who's just interested in this in general, you put yourself in a place where you can get really good feedback from them too, that then you can take back to the technical people. So I think you just sort of think through, how can we set up forums where each of these people can come and feel like their time is being used well, and then you take the input from everybody and try to come up with something, a way forward that has support, has strong support.
All right, that's a good answer. Well, I'm gonna wrap this up a little bit early, since I know a couple of us have to run at the door. So I just want to mention that there actually is a brief that I authored that was released last week, and I neglected to mention at the beginning, but it's available at nhc.org, or anybody who's interested in reading that can send me an email, and I'll forward it on to you. We are going to be sending out a link to the slides, and also the webinar will be posted on NHC's YouTube page in a couple of days, hopefully earlier than that. So anything that you missed or you want to review, you will have the resources available to you. And I just want to give a quick thanks to Capital One again for sponsoring our webinar series. Well, we have a whole bunch of these every year, so if you visit our website, you can find the schedule for them. And I want to give an extra special, huge thanks to Jillian and Dan for spending the time with us. And hopefully you can keep coming back to NHC and helping us think through these issues. So thank you very much for participating.
Great. Happy to.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.